All right, folks, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Yeagley with Compass IT Compliance. I'll be moderating today's webinar. Before we get started, I first want to say thank you to everybody who took the time out of their day to go ahead and register and attend. I appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon. Before we get rolling into the actual presentation on the changes to the Center for Internet Security's top 20 critical security controls, just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. First, everyone's mic has been muted with the exception of myself and Josh McDonald, who will be presenting to us today, to limit any type of distractions. With that being said, we will have some time for a Q&A session at the end, time permitting. So there's a couple ways that you can go ahead and do that. You'll see a chat box where you can go ahead and put any questions that you might have right into the chat box. You can put those in the public section if you'd like, or you can address them in the private section to myself. That's not a problem. You can also put them in the Q&A session as well, or section rather. Whichever is easiest for you, that's not a problem. And we'll make sure that if you do have some questions that we'll devote some time at the end to get answers to those. Second thing is that we will be making a copy of the presentation available to everybody after the webinar is completed, either later this afternoon or tomorrow morning. So I'll be sending out an email with a copy of the presentation. In addition, one of the questions that just came in from Christine, yes, it's being recorded, and we will be sending out a link to our YouTube channel and our website where you can go ahead and view a copy or a recording of the presentation rather. And you'll also get an automatic notification from Big Marker that it's been posted to their site as well. So you'll have a multitude of different ways to go ahead and watch the recording or pass it on if you see fit. So I think that covers the housekeeping items. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to introduce today's presenter. Josh McDonald is a senior IT auditor with Compass IT Compliance. He's also what we refer to as a virtual chief information security officer. So Josh works with a number of our clients that retain Compass for their outsourced information security officer roles. He acts as their information security officer, does a variety of different tasks across a variety of different vertical markets, whether that's pharmaceuticals, healthcare, retail, government, you name it, we throw it at him, and he handles it incredibly well, which is awesome. So Josh is very, very knowledgeable about the critical security controls and just IT audit and IT security in general. So I think that you'll find that the presentation is very informative and a lot of great information, especially on this topic related to the change that just took place with the newest revision of the top 20 critical security controls to version 7.0. So with that being said, I'm going to turn things over to Josh. I'm going to quiet down, let Josh go ahead and present to us. Josh, take it away, man.
Thanks, Jeff. You set the bar high for me there. I hope I can live up to it. All right, so so we're looking at the CIS top 20 critical security controls. This is the agenda for today. I'm going to do a quick overview of all 20 of them, very brief. We're not going to dig into all the sub-controls in each section and all of that. That would take probably all day. But we're going to do a quick overview, and then we're going to talk about what changes were made, why they were changed, what are some of the important differences between 6.1 and 7.0. And then finally, what does this mean for your company? I want to dive into a few of them that they prioritize different and just kind of ask some questions to get everyone thinking about the security in their own organizations and what they're doing to protect their networks and their critical information. So if you were confused by the name, this was originally referred to as the SANS Top 20. Name changed a little bit. What they did was create a set of prioritized security controls, right? And they prioritize them based on what they see going on in the industry. What does the threat landscape look like? And they really put a lot of emphasis on the first five or six controls. And the reason they do this is because they subscribe to the 80-20 principle, which many of you are probably familiar with. The idea that taking just a small portion of all the security actions you could possibly take yields a very large percentage of the benefit of taking all of those possible actions. If you do 20% of the most critical security controls in this top 20 list, generally the top 5 or 6, you're going to be in good shape. Is what we're going for there. One of the things they did is categorize the controls into different sections this time around. You might have seen this chart. What they did was they took the top 6 and they put that in a basic section. These are the ones that everyone should have. These are the essentials. I have my own opinion about one of the other ones further down the list that I think should be higher, and I'll tell you why later. But these are the top 6 ones that everyone should have. Then they go into the foundational, which, you know, if you got those top 6 nailed down, these are the ones you want to look at and you want to get into next. And then organizational, it's very people focused and around process, people, security awareness training, things like that, incident response. So let's just do a quick overview of all 20. I'm not sure, you know, who's familiar with the 20 controls, so I just want to run through them at a very high level. Control number 1 is inventory and control of hardware assets. This is, you know, making sure you know what devices are on your networks or in your data centers. You should have a master inventory list, preferably a tool that tells you what's out there with regular scanning. If you don't know what's out there, you could have an old system sitting around with vulnerabilities unpatched, or BYOD. I mean, people bring their devices all the time. They get on your network. How do you know what's being added? How do you know what's being plugged in? We'll touch on port security and things like that a bit later, but you should have an idea of what's out there, where it lives, should be asset tagged. You should be tracking it, right? Number 2 is about the software on those assets. And these two are closely tied together. When you do a software inventory to find out, you know, what's out on your network, it should be tied to the hardware asset list. You should know which devices those applications are installed on. So same kind of thing, scanning, knowing what applications are out there. So you can identify patch levels. So you know where your vulnerabilities are at and you can address them quickly. Number 3 is continuous vulnerability management. This is, are you scanning your network regularly? Are you looking for those attack vectors? Are you looking for those vulnerabilities so you can patch them? You might have, you might run a scan and find a very old system out there that isn't even supported anymore. And your decision might be, we need to get rid of that. We need to replace it. You know, XP box is a very easy example, but there could be old proprietary software that has some very big weaknesses. You should always be in this constant process of scanning, addressing and identifying your biggest risks, risk ranking them, and then remediating, and then rinsing and repeating and doing it again. And that's kind of up to you on how often you want to do that. It could be monthly, quarterly, but this idea of continuous vulnerability management, always being in that process of finding the latest vulnerabilities and remediating them. They get introduced all the time just by software updates. So that has to be an ongoing thing. It can't be a one and done. Controlled use of administrative privileges is number 4. The admin counts are the keys to all of our critical systems, and if they're compromised, well, you know, the devastation can be pretty bad. So how do we control those? That's what this is about. And there's a bunch of sub-controls in there, things you should look at doing if you're not doing them already. Obviously, multi-factor authentication is a big one, but maintaining a list of those admin accounts, reviewing it regularly. Somebody who may have been in the IT department is now in a different department. Every now and then, that list should be reviewed. We should make sure that there's alerting on the security groups, right? So if somebody is in your system, or there's an internal threat, somebody that works for your organization that's dropping themselves into different security buckets, so that should get flagged somewhere. Someone should see that and be able to address it immediately. Number 5 is secure configurations for hardware and software on mobile devices, laptops, workstations, and servers. This is talking about your images, right? What's the standard image for my server? What's the standard image for a laptop versus a workstation? Where do I keep those images? And how do I secure those images to ensure somebody hasn't tampered with them? Make sure they haven't changed from the last time you deployed to this time. And making sure all of your systems are standardized, right? If you have to patch a bunch of systems that were all configured manually one by one, it gets very messy very quickly. You want those standard, secured, hardened images in place, and then protect those. Number 6 is maintenance, monitoring, and analysis. This is really referring to all of those logs from all the various systems, maybe getting a central log server in place, analyzing those logs. Nobody can go through millions and millions of log files every hour. So How do we organize those logs? How do we review them? What kind of criteria do we put in place so the ones we want to see are up in front of our faces? So those are the basic ones. These are the top 6 that they say everybody should be doing these things, and your security will improve tremendously. If you're doing these already, great. Then we'll dig into the next section quickly. I'm just going to do another quick run through of these here. Email and web browser protection. This is, do you have web filtering on? Do you disable add-ons in your browsers? How do you control email? Do you have a third-party application that strips out links so people don't accidentally click them? Is there something that scans attachments? All the security around your email and web browsing. Malware defenses, everybody's familiar with, right? Have your antivirus, have your anti-malware, keep the definitions up to date. Really define in your policies too that all systems should have antivirus on them, and sometimes there's special provisions, right? If someone works from home, there's the big question of, do we allow them to use their home computer? How do we make sure that home computer has the right antivirus and the right patching? Maybe the decision is we don't let people do that. They have to use a company device. But these kind of considerations need to be made when it comes to antivirus and malware and third-party systems accessing our network. Number 9 is limitation and control of network ports, protocols, and services. You know, making sure that you do scans so Telnet's not open on your firewalls, and FTP and other unsecure protocols. Making sure, I mean, a lot of places we set up an office and we just patch everything in. And at the very least, we shouldn't do that, especially in public spaces. Somebody could be in the space, patch into an open port. Leave those unpatched. Put 802.1x on your ports to ensure devices aren't getting plugged in. But again, if you're doing number 1 on the security list here, then you're going to flag those devices as well. You're going to have regular scanning going on, and you're going to know something was plugged in. But better to prevent it at the source if you can. Stop those devices from getting on your network. 10, data recovery. This is, backups. Where do you keep them? Do you test that you're able to restore from those backups? Do you have them off-site? I've seen cases where people got ransomware. They only had local backups, and their local backups were encrypted as well. You don't want to be in that situation. So you want to test your restoring, make sure it works. Last thing you want to find out is that, hey, we've had a major data loss. We need to restore, and the restore doesn't work, or our backups are encrypted, as I mentioned before. 11 is secure configuration. So this is not secure configuration for network devices like firewalls, routers, and switches. This is not what I mentioned before about images. This is more having those hardening guides in place. How do we set these up? How do we make sure every switch that we put out there has the same secure configuration? Which things do we disable on the switch? Which features do we enable? Do we change the default password from administrator or root to something else that people won't be able to try to brute force? So that's all those kind of configurations. 12, boundary defense. This control section is talking about IDS and IPS, intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, protecting that perimeter. Data protection is around encryption. That section's on, should I have USB drives enabled or disabled? How do we encrypt all of our workstations? How do we encrypt data in transit, at rest? All the controls around protecting our critical data. 14 is controlled access based on the need to know. This is the idea of you assign people roles and permissions and access rights based on least privilege. You don't give them the keys to everything. Some of this too is going as far as to VLAN certain sections. In PCI, that's a big thing. The cardholder data environment needs to be on a separate VLAN, and there are regulations around how often we need to actually try to break into our own VLAN and pen test that and make sure it's secure. So you can control with file level access, you can control with VLANing, and that's what this control section talks about. And each of these has sub controls under it. So if you haven't looked at it and you pull up the full PDF or the full matrix with the changes from 6.1 to 7, you can look at all these subsections and what you should be doing to sort of accomplish these 20 controls. Wireless access, strong encryption, making sure you're doing rogue access scans. Again, it comes back to assets again, making sure you know which devices are out there so you can identify if some other access point was added or some funny business is going on. Also, disabling wireless on devices that don't need it. If you have workstations that are hardwired, turn the wireless off, disable those extra features. 16, account monitoring and control. Same kind of thing as before with the admin accounts. Where's the list of accounts that are out there? How often do we review them? Is logging turned on so that we can see maybe 10 failed login attempts and then a success? Well, that should flag something. Maybe we should look at that. Maybe that was a brute force and somebody actually got in. You know, setting that criteria around the user accounts and monitoring those. And then the last 4, as I said, are organizational. They put these categories in place. Security awareness training program is the one that I think should be further down the list somewhere, and I'll dig into that in a minute. Application software security. So if you develop in-house software, if you have a programming team, this is around having an SDLC in place, making sure you're doing secure coding practices. If you use any kind of third-party tools or add-ons, checking those out. I've had situations recently where just people install an add-on from a marketplace and you go, well, did we check it out? Does the company we have an agreement with actually vet those? In some cases, they don't. Some cases, they say, hey, you know what? We don't take responsibility for what's on our marketplace. That's on you. And you need to look at that and set up a separate agreement and really vet those third-party add-ons. That's all around that section 18 there. 19, incident response. How do we respond to an incident? Do we have a plan? Plan's the first step, but then testing the plan. If you have a good incident response plan and team in place, and that breach does occur, you're going to be able to isolate the systems you need to quickly, mitigate the monetary losses, and just really get all hands on that situation and mitigate the damage as quickly as possible. Pen test and red team. This is the last one. This is if you really got your stuff together, you're running regular pen tests and you're hiring people to break in at the red team, right? Whatever it takes. You're taking the position of I'm a hacker, I'm a criminal. How do I get into your environment? How do I get in to your network? How do I get to your data? And I'm hired to do it basically whatever it takes. You've hired me to break in. So that's the quick overview. That's the quick rundown. So why the changes? The threat landscape is changing all the time, as we've said. And this is a prioritized list of controls. So when they look at the threat landscape and they speak to experts across all industries, they might decide, hey, you know, we need to reprioritize this list. That's one of the reasons that they've made changes here. The other is they've tried to simplify things. When you have 20 security controls and each one of those has 10 to 15 subcontrols, and then some of those have multiple tasks you need to do for each one, it can get pretty in-depth pretty quickly. What they did this time around was they made it a little easier to follow. They cleaned up some of the wording, but they made it so per subcontrol there's only one task now. You're not going to have a subcontrol with five things you need to do. Each subcontrol has one. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. This is what I need to look at. They focused more across the board this time around on authentication, encryption, and application whitelisting. Whitelisting, obviously, making sure that those applications are in our environment are only the ones approved. Nothing else can be run. Nothing else can be installed. Encryption, obviously, huge one. I think further down the list, I'm just going to skip ahead for a second. Further down the list, one of the reasons they did this too was to map this framework with other ones like NIST and PCI and some of the others. And especially with PCI, again, encryption's critical. In transit, at rest, HIPAA, same thing, protecting that information. Encryption is a huge part of those frameworks and controls. And they also do this to account for new cybersecurity tools. New tools being released all the time, better ways to accomplish putting the controls in place that we need to secure our environments. I mentioned the frameworks, map to NIST. Later on as well in the slide deck, I have a resources page. One of those resources is the Excel sheet that maps this framework to all the others. So if you're doing NIST, if you're PCI, if you've ISO, there's like 20 to 30 tabs on the bottom, and you can see how this framework maps to the other ones. The other reason they did the changes was to identify, those types we looked at, those groupings. There are 3 main categories. They broke it down by those categories. It's very easy to see. It's very easy to focus on, which section is right for you and your business. Whereas before, it's just a full list of 20. You might not know where to start. It just makes it clear. I focus on these first. I move on to the next set, and then these other ones at the end are sort of different, less technical controls, but important for the organization for a variety of reasons. Sorry, I'm just taking a sip of water here. Right, so they simplified the names of some of them. I'll show you that in a second. The bucketed approach we just talked about, I went ahead and talked about that. Okay, so these are the changes in priority they made. In the top 5 that you see here, they moved the secure configurations for hardware and software, which are those images and how we secure them, down the list. And they moved up the continuous vulnerability assessments and remediation, and they moved up the control of admin privileges. A little further down in the slides, I have some things I want to highlight from the Verizon breach report, which I think shows why they made these changes, why they said, okay, the imaging is a little further down here. These 2 are more important to move up. These are the name changes. I'm not going to run through them, but this just shows you how they've tried to simplify the names, align better with the sub-controls in the document. All right, so version 7 by the numbers. They made 3 priority changes, which I just showed you. They made 6 name changes on the list of 20. And then they categorized the people and process ones and made some changes there. 13 of the 20 controls had changes in them, which accounts for 65% of the control set. There is a matrix that shows every single change they made. If I went through that today, it would take all day. So we're not doing that, but the Excel sheet is available on the website, and you can see every single change. It tells you if it was an addition, a deletion, a rewording, combining. They really made it easy to see what changed if you're familiar with the 6.1 version versus the new 7.0 update. So what does this mean for your company, for my company, for the customers I work with? The changes in the controls are a reflection of the changes in the threat landscape. When they move vulnerability management from number 4 to number 3, that should tell us something. We need to ask some questions. Are we performing those regular vulnerability scans across our environment? Are we in that regular process of assessing, identifying, and remediating? That can be tough if you're a small shop. You have to put you have to take the time to put that assessment process in place and then follow through with it. It's important, as I mentioned, because, sorry if you hear that, outside the office, a big truck just drove by. So you need to put that process in place. You need to be doing it on a regular basis. Things that you don't intend to open up new weaknesses will. Software updates, new hardware. If you're tracking this stuff on the web and all the latest breaches, it's changing all the time. New software is rolling out so fast. These vulnerabilities get added by the week. Patch management, that's a big one, right? Have you automated your patch management? Not only have you flagged if a system hasn't checked in or hasn't received patches, maybe automate that so it generates a ticket in your help desk so it doesn't get lost, so you don't forget about it, so it gets resolved right away. But the Equifax breach was due to an unpatched system. That was a huge breach. So it's super important that we're patching our systems, that we have automated tools to help us achieve that, because it's so hard to track every system everywhere. It's nearly impossible. You have to automate these kind of solutions. The next slide is they also moved administrative privileges up from 5 to 4. As I mentioned, do you maintain that list of admin accounts. Do you review it regularly? I would recommend that something goes on your calendar for both the vulnerability scan and the review of the admin accounts. That these two are so critical to make sure changes aren't happening that you're not aware of. You need to be able to respond to what's going on. With admin accounts, do you set up dedicated administrator accounts for performing activities that require elevated privileges? Everybody's organization has the power users that are like, I need admin rights on my system for XYZ reason. Well, we don't want to make everyone an admin on their own system. We should be giving them a separate admin account or a separate admin account on the system that the IT department can use when they need to elevate. That way, if their local account is compromised by malware or virus, it can't go as far. It's limited by what that everyday regular account has access to. Multi-factor authentication, huge for admin accounts. That really puts it really makes it hard for somebody to crack your password when multi-factor is in use. If you're not doing it for everyone, take advantage of the systems that allow you to just use a free multi-factor authentication, Google Authenticator, for your admin accounts. Start with your admin accounts and then roll multi-factor out to everyone else. But those admin accounts are just so powerful, we need to protect them. And then I think I mentioned this earlier too, logging and alerting for the admin accounts, but also for the security groups. You should know when somebody's added to a security group or removed. You don't want those things happening in the background. If somebody, got onto a system because of a phishing attack and somebody clicked the wrong thing and they were able to gain access to add themselves to security groups, you want to be able to identify that quickly and respond. I also had additional recommendation here to look at the new NIST password guidelines. If for some reason you're unable to put multi-factor authentication on some of your systems, make sure those passwords are secure. What we've been doing for so long with 8 characters, uppercase, lowercase, letter, symbol, it isn't enough. And the new NIST guidelines are talking more about longer phrases that you don't have to change as often, maybe annually rather than monthly, but longer, past phrases. And so I definitely think you should look at that for your admin accounts if there's cases where you can't put multi-factor on them. So when was the last time you conducted a risk assessment? This framework, there is an Excel sheet. I just took a couple screenshots. There's an Excel sheet online. I have it in the, I have the link at the end of the slide deck, but it's a self-assessment. You could take an hour and go through this and look and just quickly identify the areas you should focus on in the coming weeks. So you could start with that. It's very good. They basically put a sub-tab for every control group. So there's 20 tabs at the bottom, but you just go through and it allows you to choose from a little drop down of 4 items and say, I have this, but it's not really a defined process. I have this and it's really mature and it's great. And then you just go through those questions, and on the main sheet, which is the screenshot on the left, kind of show you, these are the areas I should focus on. These are the areas I should start with. Additional recommendations. So the one I think is very important that is just so far down the list is a security awareness and training program. Having that in place. And I say that based on what we're seeing in the industry with our customers and with just if you read the news, right? The Verizon 2018 data breach investigation report found users are 3 times more likely to be breached through social engineering than through vulnerabilities. The top 5 to 6 controls are about finding what systems are on your network, tracking the applications on those systems, patching, identifying new systems. That's all very good. Those things should be done. However, the weakest link these days is often the end user that doesn't understand security. So I really think this should be a priority for most organizations with what we're seeing out there. Ransomware remains a significant threat for companies of all sizes. So this report found that 48% of the breaches were ransomware, 17% social engineering, usually phishing emails, 17% were errors, 12% were privilege misuse, and physical breaches, stealing files, things like that were 11%. So if you think about it, 60% of the breaches that are happening are, somebody clicked the wrong thing. Ransomware got on the system. Somebody clicked a phishing email. I think this one is critical for businesses to look at right now, educating the end users, and not just like an annual, okay, I watched the video and I'm going to forget about it for the rest of the year. If you're a security person, if you're the only IT person in your organization, try to find time to send those quick emails and tips and train staff on, hey, here's what you need to look for. Here's what you need to avoid. We run phishing campaigns all the time, and the more we run them for our customers, the staff starts to catch on. They start to think, oh, this is one of those phishing emails that's trying to trick me, and it could be a legitimate one, but they're catching it because they know they're being tested. They begin to know what to look for. These are the resources I mentioned. I probably talked a lot more quickly than I should have, so Jeff will slap me on the wrist later. But this is the resource page, and we're kind of moving into that Q&A section now.
Awesome, Josh. Thank you so much. Great job, man. That's a lot of great stuff. And it's interesting. Some of the controls that you pointed out that are critical. I agree with you completely that the security awareness training one. If we're going to continuously monitor for vulnerabilities, we need to continuously assess our people, right, and make sure that they have the tools to equip them to be able to identify these types of attacks. And it's funny. Maybe it's because we're a security firm. I don't know, but anytime we get any type of email, you can see the Slack messages start to go, right? Is this legit? Did this really get sent out? Our HR director sent out something for our benefits, and I don't think anybody clicked on it or registered or did anything. We all questioned it, and she had to tell us, yes, this is in fact legit. You can go ahead and click on it. So great stuff. Great job, Josh. Thank you so much for doing this. Folks, I'll open up the opportunity one more time here. If you have any questions on any of the information that Josh went over, feel free to pop those into the chat box, and we can get to those as time permits. We do have one question that came in that I'll run through. So again, if you have any other questions for the attendees, feel free to pop those in there. And this is a really good question, right? And I think this is a challenge a lot of organizations face in terms of resources and limited budget and things of that nature. So the question is, if we're a small shop with limited budget and resources, but know we need better security, where do you recommend that we start?
That is a good question. I would say this list and the way they've categorized it really lends itself nicely to getting started if you don't know where to begin. Obviously, those first 6 controls is a good place to start, but I would say download that Excel self-assessment for a start, and just focus on the first 5 or 6. Focus on those top 6, find your weaknesses there, and just pick the controls that are going to make the biggest impact to securing your organization. Make that your goal for the year. I'm going to do everything I can to get these first 6 in place and to identify those weaknesses. I think that's a good place to start.
I agree. Yeah, I think that there's a reason they prioritize some of these, and I know we talked a little bit about the security awareness one kind of being a little bit more upfront and stuff, and they're all important, right? But you got to kind of start with what are the ones that are quick hits, right? The numbers 1 through 6 for sure. Another question came in here. This is a good one. Which is the best, most effective and least effective bio-authentication method? And I think what they're talking about is for the multi-factor authentication, biometrics. Is there one that's more effective? Is there one that's least effective or less effective? Can you give any feedback around that, Josh?
I would have to do a little bit of research to figure out which one is the best. I think the important thing is that it's multi-layered, right? We're using a password and we're using this other piece, and somebody would need to obtain both. I can't really speak to at this moment, but I can get back to you on this after I talk with the team on which might be the most effective and the least. But I think it's just important that somebody would need to gather multiple pieces of information, basically have us in a room, give up our password at gunpoint, and put our hand or our retina or the face recognition that Microsoft has now. I think it's those multiple pieces that really make it secure more than one or the other. But I am happy to do more research on that and get you an answer.
Sure. That'd be great. You bring up a good point here too, and this is something that was kind of shed to light when the latest version of the PCI data security standard came out. It used to read two-factor authentication, and they changed it to multi, so it doesn't limit you to two, right? The point is that layering it to make sure that there's, like you said, right? Someone's got to get your password. They have to, hold you hostage or whatever the case might be, or clone your fingerprint or clone your retina, which is obviously, I don't even know if it's possible, but that's for CSI shows to figure out. But the point is that make it more difficult for people to gather this information and to gain access. And that was really, highlighted in the latest version of PCI specific to the administrative privileges for obvious reasons, right? They kind of hold the keys to the kingdom. So good stuff. And Linda, if you have additional questions, or if you need additional information, we can get you some more information on that for sure. We're a little bit past 2:36. Actually, one more question here. Let me just read this out loud. Give me 1 second here. This one might take a little bit of time to get an answer on. So why is endpoint AI and behavior analysis so expensive? Will there be another product out there that is least expensive? I don't know if we can kind of predict in terms of will there be one that's least expensive. I think typically with these types of products and services and whatnot, when it's new, it's not, I don't want to say not as well known. And Josh, maybe you can clean this answer up for me a little bit. But as it gets older, I don't want to say older either.
I think it's just a matter of it being so new, and the R&D costs usually on something like that. Researching and spending the time on something, especially like AI, that's just so bleeding edge right now, that that cost is going to go down over time. But I think it's really just the R&D, the research, the staff, the expertise you need to bring in to build something like that, and over time we'll see it drop.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, and I wonder, with the next revision of the critical security controls and other frameworks for that matter, not just specific to the top 20, will they introduce more aspects around behavior analysis and understanding, the typical patterns of behavior for users, and then looking at abnormalities. I mean, might be a little bit down the road, but I think that's definitely the way that things are heading for sure. Because you're right, sitting there and reviewing audit logs and millions of lines of logs is probably just not feasible, right? So how can we manage that process a little easier to look for abnormalities as opposed to trying to look for everything? So be interesting to see kind of what happens. But one thing we know for sure, technology is always changing, right? And they're always coming out with new things, and it's good to see the controls and the way that they've grouped them and the way that they've structured them to allow for those new products to kind of come out. Not that they didn't in the past, but to account for those emerging security products. So it's definitely good stuff. Any other questions that are out there at this point in time? I'd say speak now or forever hold your peace, but you guys can't speak because I muted you all. So type now or don't type again. I don't know what to say there, but looks like that's the majority of the questions. So with that, Josh, first I want to say thank you for taking the time to prepare the presentation and then present and answer questions, and appreciate you taking the time. I know that you're incredibly busy with client work, so thank you for taking the time to do this and presenting to everybody who was able to attend today. For the folks that attended, thank you to you as well for taking the time out of your day to attend. I know that this is always, you guys get flooded with webinar requests and invitations and whatnot, so appreciate you devoting some of your time to hearing us present and hearing Josh present specifically on the critical security controls. With that, I will wrap up the webinar. I will let you know that we're going to do May's webinar, obviously in May, towards the end of the month, but it's going to be on GDPR. I know that's kind of getting thrown around all over the place, but we're going to coincide it with pretty close to the launch, which is May 25th. So it'll be right around that date to kind of answer any questions that folks might have. So look for that invitation to come out and be posted to our site the first week of May. But again, thank you, everybody. I will send a copy of the presentation, send out a copy of, a link to the webinar recording, so you can go ahead and grab any information out of there you see fit. But appreciate everybody's time. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and we look forward to presenting to you in May. Take care, everybody.